Hey guys, Station X here, and today we're going to be taking a look at my Sega Dreamcast collection. When it comes to the Sega Dreamcast, this was Sega's last home system, and it was quite remembered fondly, but back in the day it was considered a failure. And that's kind of due to a couple different reasons. The fact that their previous system wasn't really a home hitter, and so there was like no trust in Sega to produce something pretty good, and therefore it led to low sales right off the bat. Plus, also, companies weren't lining up to kind of work with Sega, so Sega was kind of dependent on making their own stuff. Kind of similarly to how Nintendo was for a little bit. They have that reputation of mainly just you buy the Nintendo system for the Nintendo games, and any third-party stuff you buy on other systems. They're either better on there or they just don't exist on Nintendo. But Sega was kind of facing that same problem with the Saturn and eventually to the Dreamcast. But with their desperation to have really good games on there, they in turn invested into really good games that we don't really get to hear a whole lot of today. And I think that's kind of a shame because we have some pretty cool ones here that we're going to go look at today. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it and just kind of show what I have for the Sega Dreamcast. But before we do that, I will say also, I don't have Sonic Adventure. I don't know if you can see here. I just want to get that out of the way because it's going to be noticeable. And why don't I have the most important Sega game of all time for Dreamcast? And it's because I just never kind of got around to doing it. I already have a way of playing it on the GameCube, so as far as me having it to play it, not really necessary. As far as me having it for the Dreamcast, I also just can never find it. It's always sold out everywhere, and it's rightfully so because it's a popular Sega game. And I do try to buy games in person rather than online. At some point, I am going to get it and have a complete Dreamcast collection, but this is just to show what I have today. And what we have here, starting off the bat, we have Air Force Delta, and along with it, Arrow Wings, two piloting games, which is kind of cool. We have Atari Anniversary Edition, kind of the quintessential thing that every video game system has, is that they have an Atari collection. Basically, it's like night and day. A video game system will come out, an Atari collection will be put on it. Here's a random one, Caesar's Palace 2000. It's basically a gambling game, just you're at a casino doing casino stuff. And what's nice is that you could practice the habit of gambling without having to spend actual money on it, unlike today's games. A really good classic, Crazy Taxi 1 and 2. This one you can see how much I paid for it. So I don't know if it's any cheaper or more expensive, but I did pay $34.99 plus tax. So, but these are really cool games, and you're just kind of going around in a taxi and doing some wacky stuff. So really awesome games made by Sega, original IPs for that. And same thing with this one, Samba de Amigo, made by the Sonic team themselves, which is just kind of the thing with Sega, is that they're basically mostly known for Sonic, but back in the day they had other stuff too. With this one, a wrestling game, ECW Hardcore Revolution. Another thing that most people don't remember is when there was more than just WWE as far as wrestling games. I mean, people know it now because now AEW has a game, but back in the day, not only was there WWE, there was WCW, and the little engine that could, ECW. And what's nice about this is that it basically plays like No Mercy, or similarly to No Mercy. It's ECW. You kind of have no rules, weapons, all that good stuff, and it's just kind of a lot of fun with most of your ECW favorites. So if you're a big wrestling fan, this is a good one to pick up. Here we have Hidden Dangers, another really cool game. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Rainbow from first glance, but is pretty cool. Also there too, a really fun arcade game. I would see this in like specifically arcades everywhere, and that's something Sega's really good at, is making really fun arcade games, and they do a really good job of kind of translating that to a console version. Although I will say, like, most of my fond memories of House of the Dead 2 is picking up that plastic little arcade gun and pointing it, you know, on an arcade screen. Here we have one of the many Sega sports titles, NBA 2K1. Now I'm 90% sure that this has no relation to like the 2K that we know today, but this was kind of neat because EA at the time was kind of like the king of sports games, and I believe EA was just not willing to work with Sega after the Saturn. So in desperation of needing sports titles on their system to have sports fans over, they made their own sports games, and so a lot of people swear by them that they're very good and still have a fan base to this day. Another one we have here is NFL 2K, which is something I would never thought come out of my mouth, is saying NFL 2K. It just doesn't make it. I'm so used to hearing football, it's Madden. But here we have a non-Madden football game, and that is a pretty neat one as well. One of the founding fathers of first-person shooter game. We have Quake, specifically Quake Arena 3, and I've always wanted to play some kind of Quake game, and seeing this on console, because I'm mostly a console person, I wanted to jump right into it. Something you could do with the Dreamcast is hook it directly up to a router. You could do online and stuff, and so this was pretty cool, and I doubt it works nowadays, but it's something that's nice to me because I'm a big fan of FPSs, and I think that having something that kind of was part of the building blocks to what we have today is pretty cool in my opinion. One of the more famous Sega titles on here of all time, Seaman. And basically, it's a Tamagotchi with attitude because you're raising a sea creature into these different evolutions to become the Seaman. And this guy asks you all sorts of questions. He's very rude about it, and it's one of the very few games that uses the microphone peripheral that you can use with the Dreamcast. And it's a very slow pace, like slower than Animal Crossing kind of game, and it's not something that I'd probably recommend to a lot of people, but I think it's quite funny. Maximum Pool is one of those nice shovelware games, and I mean, honestly, I like pool. I have an app for pool on my phone, and I like playing the actual game in person, so I mean, why not have a Dreamcast one? And here we have the famous Space Channel 5 with a really unique cover, and I gotta say, it's titles like this that I wish Sega would keep producing, like the Crazy Taxis, Space Channel 5s, Samba de Amigo. You almost never hear about them anymore, but this is a quite unique one and a must pick for Dreamcast. Next up, we have Speed Devils. This one is a racing game, and it kind of reminds me again of arcade racing games that you would see in the arcade. And while I don't have a racing sim to kind of replicate that, I mean, this is probably the next best thing in my opinion. Soul Calibur 1, the very first Soul Calibur game, although I do believe there was a different series that was connected with Soul Calibur, but I know about Soul Calibur. I like this fighting game series, and while the first one I've never really played, I started with Soul Calibur 2, as I think many of other fans of Soul Calibur has started on the second one. This was the one that started it all, and I just think it's neat to just kind of go back, see where a series that I like started. I mean, I'm the kind of person who plays the first Super Smash Brothers, even though everyone says Melee is the best one. So it's like I'm curious if I'll have the same opinion about the first Soul Calibur. Here's one of the many South Park games that is not the Stick of Truth and is kind of bad, South Park Slub Shack. And yeah, it's just the South Park game. A lot of people will tell you that most South Park games are kind of bad, although there is a fan of these kinds of games out there. But personally, Stick of Truth is kind of like the only South Park game that I think is worth playing. And here's Star Wars Demolition. This is an interesting one because I had never heard of Star Wars Demolition. Of course, you know the famous ones like the Battlefronts, the Jedi Knights, etc., etc. But this one, never heard of before. It's total vehicular carnage, apparently. And this one also here says, from the creators of Vigilante 8 and Vigilante 8 Second Offense, which is pretty neat. And I mean, I do like my Destruction. Burnout is another racing game that does that. And to combine that with Star Wars, I mean, I think that sounds like a pretty good time. Here we have another shovelware game, Sydney 2000. This was kind of before you had your Mario and Sonic at the Olympics sort of deal, and this one was 2000. Now I have kind of like a special reason for why I bought this, and that's just simply due to the fact that I was born in 2000. So when I saw this, I was like, oh hey, that was the year I was born, I'm gonna buy it just cause. We have Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. I believe this is the original one. It is a little weird that with the Dreamcast, there's only one joystick. So playing a Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six without dual analog sticks doesn't seem right to me, but I guess it's better than playing the PlayStation version with just the regular non-DualShock controller, the one without the joysticks. So this has at least one, so that's pretty nice. But it is a little weird to play on Dreamcast regardless. And here we have Toy Commander. Now this is basically, you're playing as children's toys, but in a big battle, which is just kind of an interesting sentence to say. But it does seem like a lot of fun. It won me over based off of the fact that there's a teddy bear holding a stick of dynamite. And it just kind of reminds me of some Looney Tunes nonsense. UFC Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's funny because this is probably one of the first games UFC ever did, and this is during the early days of UFC. So it's not like UFC that many people know as it is today. It's kind of more of back when it first started. And back then it was kind of a bit wild, a little less strict on rules, which is kind of interesting. But I think this is one of the only games, I think this is the only game they did on Dreamcast, which is interesting. Not only do you have WWE games, I believe there's WCW on there, you have ECW, you have UFC as well. So a big wide variety of like that sports fighting on Dreamcast. And here we have Unreal Tournament. Now with this one, this was kind of during me buying a bunch of FPSs for the Dreamcast. There's quite a few on here. This one's interesting because I did have a couple of them for the PlayStation system. Never knew they had it on Dreamcast, and so had to have gotten it on here. So that's pretty good. Wild Metal Reclaim the Future. It's kind of like a futuristic apocalypse kind of game, which is pretty neat here, and made by Rockstar. This is kind of an unknown Rockstar game in my opinion, because I never heard of this series, nor have I ever heard anybody else talking about it. I'm curious to see if they would ever bring this back, but considering how GTA does, I don't think so. Another Sega Sports series, and that is the World Series Baseball 2K1. So they also had baseball, they had basketball, they had NFL. I don't know what other ones they had. I think they have NHL as well, but they had a whole lot of different wide variety of sports. And here we have not one, but two WWF games, Royal Rumble and WWF Attitude. Get it. But yeah, this one was done by Acclaim Sports, which is very interesting. And here we have one made by the good old classic THQ, which THQ for the longest time was making the WWE games, or F in this case. But one made by Acclaim, kind of interesting, because these Dreamcast games I haven't gotten a chance to try, because mainly I played the Here Comes the Pain, the Smackdown Shut Your Mouth, and onward. I never really played like the PlayStation 1 and under kind of games, like the wrestling games from before the PS2 basically. These are I saw, and I mean of course because I'm a big wrestling fan, I knew I had to get it. And with the last two games we have here, I saved these for last because they're the thick cases, so they have multiple discs and stuff. We have, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing this, Grandia 2. Yeah, I always have trouble pronouncing this, but this is an RPG made by Ubisoft. Pretty cool. I wouldn't say I'm like the biggest Ubisoft fan, but I do like some of their games. Of course, the famous Shenmue, which I have never tried, because for the longest time, not been a big fan of RPGs, and I'm not even sure if this is a RPG per se. I know a lot of Shenmue fans are probably gonna get really mad at me, but I just never was into those kind of like anime type games for the longest time until recently, and so I have a lot of catching up to do because of the fact that if you've watched my Switch collecting videos, you'll know that I buy a lot of Switch games based off of cool anime covers. This is basically kind of what I did here with this one, because it's a cool anime cover. I do have an appreciation for the art style. I was just never into the games themselves. And with Shenmue here, I mean, this was kind of the game that I've always heard good things about on the Dreamcast, and so I knew I had to pick it up. And it's nice too, because this eventually it had a sequel on here already. There was Shenmue 1 and 2, and I do believe Shenmue 3 came out years later. I'm not too 100% sure on the history or timeline of the releases, but I do know that the Shenmue series in its entirety, I believe, is on PS4, so that's pretty neat. Something I do want to say about the Dreamcast games here, and I know we're staring at those, I'll talk about those in a second. Something I did want to kind of talk about a little bit is I've always wished that Sega didn't have to stop making consoles because of how, you know, popular the Dreamcast became over time. I mean, like, maybe back then people weren't super hot on the Dreamcast, but as you can see here with just these games alone, there's a lot of really fun, popular titles on the Dreamcast, and there's almost a game for every kind of person on there, and a lot of them are touted as really good games that hold up to this day. And I think it'd have been nice to see, at the very minimum, if they weren't gonna continue making consoles and they were gonna go strictly to just making games for other platforms and be a third party, then I would have wished that they would continue doing something like similar to Space Channel 5, making games for those, or Samba de Amigo, or Crazy Taxi at least, because typically I would find that Sega either doesn't make new games for these series, or just never, if they do, I just never hear about them ever. They get very little to no advertising. It's always Sonic, Sonic, Sonic. Now, they do have their names attached to other stuff. I mean, Persona, for one. I believe they own Atlas, so I mean, Persona is something that Sega's name is on it, but they don't make the games themselves. I mean, they think the Sega team strictly only makes Sonic. If they did make other games, I just never hear them talk about it. But the thing you were looking at before is these guys, the Sega web browser, which is basically Sega's way of connecting you to the World Wide Net. So, and this one was AT&T. This had AT&T's involvement, at least. And then this one has SegaNet, so it includes full version of Sega Swirl Game, which is interesting, another AT&T thing. These were kind of the first baby steps into getting video game consoles to have things like internet, like being able to connect to the internet with them, playing online, downloading apps, basically doing everything that you could on a computer or on a phone, but on a video game console. And I kind of also just do like that this has the Sega console itself, and this has the controller as the covers and stuff. But that is basically every single Dreamcast game that I happen to own right now. And of course, at some point I will be doing a video of trying to get every single Sega Dreamcast game to get the complete US set. But let me know what you guys think of the Sega Dreamcast. I want to know your thoughts and opinions and your favorite game on the Sega Dreamcast in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, a like and subscribe always helps out. I've been Station X, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.